Although. No, she's all right.
It started.
Okay, shh. We're going to listen.
Ever since the Revolutionary War, veterans have had a large impact on government policy. In fact, back in 1887, the Continental Army actually, through petitioning Congress over and over again, chasing them from city to city, actually caused the founding of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., as we know it today. I spent a lot of years working on different revolutions and studying ways of making change in established systems. I believe that civil disobedience is still an effective means to achieve change without violence. So I'll present the story of the Bonus Army of 1932. During this time of the Great Depression, there were over 25% unemployment rate, and a lot of these were returning vets whose jobs had been taken while they were overseas. Most of these men were draftees, first time in American history. And they didn't all get shipped out. Some of them stayed at home to do the factory work and farming that was required to win the war in Europe. There was a 10-to-1 pay difference. If you went overseas, you made the one. You stayed at home, you had the 10. So the bonus that these guys were seeking was actually what they called adjusted compensation. It's basically back pay that they would have made had they stayed at home. And in 1924, Congress actually approved the paying of this. But you didn't get the money until 1945, which doesn't help starving men and their families in their 30s. The average rate of the bonus was going to be about $600 to $1,000, and in today's money, that's $8,500 to $14,000. These men and their families were hungry now. So from VFW posts around the country, men began to organize a march on Washington, D.C. to petition Congress to get their payment a little early. And in 1932, over 10,000 vets were in the Capitol, with their families and more on the way. They wore their uniforms, they brought their families and supplies, they did not bring guns. They really thought their government was going to just listen and help them. They ended up forming a tent city south of town across the river. There were American flags everywhere, there was constant music, there was food, and even a library provided by the Salvation Army. And by June 4th, over 45,000 veterans had gathered. They were well organized, and every day there were at least 2 veterans in every representative's office in the Capitol, and within 2 weeks, the House passed the bill for repayment. But on July 17th, the Senate constantly rejected it. On July 16th, the last day of their session, they had still failed to pass the bill. Most of the veterans, they just went back home to whatever they had, but over 11,000 stayed. On July 28th, Herbert Hoover ordered their evacuation. The police tried to just get them to leave peaceably, but as what usually happens with angry mobs, with nowhere to go, we asked them to leave. Rocks ended up being thrown, and 2 veterans were shot. One of them was killed. So by about 4:30 p.m. that day, the Army, led by General Douglas MacArthur, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and General Patton in cavalry, moved out with tear gas, bayonets, and sabers to remove them from the Capitol. Once they got them back across the river to their town, MacArthur defied presidential orders and set the whole thing on fire. I believe he was quoted as saying, "I can't be bothered with pieces of paper at a time like this." So, after the violent ousting of the veterans, public sentiment turned way in their favor. They elected a new Democratic president, but still, he wouldn't let the legislation pass. So every year after that, veterans still gathered to petition. And finally, in 1936, despite the presidential veto, the bill finally passed, and over 4 million veterans finally received the much needed relief. The lasting benefit of this that we can still feel today is the GI Bill, allowing veterans who serve to come back home access to housing and education that they normally wouldn't have. The potential for change is always there. It just takes a small, determined amount and a persistent group to make it happen. Yeah, I'm about to. I haven't hit stop yet. And the audience. Yay. Thank you, audience, for participating.